All right. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this talk with the Regrow Ag team about the ecosystem and soil carbon markets. First, I want to give a little bit of logistics. So this event is hosted by Work on Climate. I think we might have attendees from outside the community. For those people, we are an organization helping people pivot their careers into climate through a variety of programs. And we have the world's largest online climate community on Slack. So come join us. I'm Eugene. I'm a co-founder and executive director of Work on Climate. I will be facilitating this. If you have many questions to me, feel free to drop it into the chat or DM me. Now, I also said that this event will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel and on our past events page. All of our past events are posted over there. I'm dropping a link into the chat. So feel free to check it out there later. And we will also be taking notes in a document that I'm also going to paste into the chat. Please let us take notes there collaboratively. These notes are incredibly helpful for people who didn't attend the event, or even to people who did but don't want to rewatch an hour of a talk to remember something specific from it. All right, now to the meat of the talk. I'm going to just say a little bit about the company and hand it over to you people. So Regrow tackles emissions from farming, which happens to currently be one of the most polluting industries, but it doesn't have to be. And the Regrow team will tell us about their technology and products that help farmers get paid for producing food in a climate positive way. I personally learned about Regrow and was excited to invite them to give a talk after coming across one of their product demo videos on YouTube, in which it seemed like they really know what they're doing with geospatial machine learning, which was particularly interesting part to me, but there are probably going to be a lot of interesting things here. So I'm looking forward to hearing more. And we have with us Anastasia Volkova, who is CEO and co-founder of Regrow Ag, and several of her team members that I'll let her introduce. So Anastasia, please take it over.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Great to see everybody joining the talk, and so many folks registered. We're flattered. Thank you so much for having us. I'm not going to take too long to introduce Regrow, given that Eugene has just done so. But I would like you to think about us as an enterprise software company that solves a piece of the climate crisis, the one that is inflicted by agriculture, by connecting food companies, the brands that you usually have in your pantry, in your fridge, in your freezer, with the farmers who actually produce the food themselves, to flow the incentives that currently are being generated by the value of reducing carbon by sequestering it in the soil, or pulling it from the atmosphere and sequestering it in the soil. And we're very excited that we get to do such important work. I'm going to introduce the three wonderful regrowers who are here with us today and will lead the presentation. It's Lisa McFarland, and she actually is farming in Iowa and has a first-person perspective on what it is to be building soil health with a farmer. We have Katie Wellington, who's our product designer, and she leads and supports our head of product in a number of product initiatives that they will cover today. We've got Scott Hurley, and he's a team lead of our carbon engineering team. A lot of different noodles he's untangling in between the science and the code to make sure that farmers are getting the right estimates of carbon that they have been sequestering, are sequestering, can possibly be sequestering. And Eleni Paulson is our fantastic marketing content manager, and I guess she's facilitating the talk. She might not be covering, like me, nothing herself. I just wanted to introduce my team and hand over to them for wherever they want to take it.
Thank you, Anastasia. Hello and welcome. We're here to talk about our work, what we do, why we enjoy what we do, and everything we're trying to accomplish to accelerate sustainability in agriculture. And Anastasia already introduced the three of us. So with that, I'll hand it off to Katie to talk about the problem as we see it.
Great, thanks, Scott. Thanks, Anastasia and Eugene. I think I'm waiting just to see the presentation.
Yes, we are just waiting for the screen sharing to be enabled. I will share it in just a moment.
Yeah, it's enabled. Go for it.
Thank you. Can you see now? Thank you. Sorry for the delay.
Yeah, looks good.
Thanks, Lenny. Can you go ahead and go to the next slide? Great. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the problem. So as many of you probably know, the world is facing a climate crisis, and every industry and every facet of our society is going to need to work together to solve this issue. Agriculture is a major emissions contributor, but also has the unique ability to be an important part of the climate crisis solution. Next slide. So we're in a really pivotal decade where we need to make the most change in order not to exceed the 1.5 degree rise outlined by climate scientists. So everyone in this call, this is the time to act. Now is the time to get involved, which is very exciting. And if we utilize our land appropriately, we can slow and even possibly reverse climate change. So let that sink in for a second here. Yeah, so you heard that right. If we use our land correctly, we can store more greenhouse gases in the soil, mitigate the effects of climate change. We can drastically reduce emissions from food production and lend a hand in reducing emissions for others too. So this is where Regrow comes in. At Regrow, we're working to solve the problem of climate change and transform agriculture to help mitigate its effects. Our mission is to make resilient agriculture ubiquitous on every acre across the globe. We're going to play a quick video for you that kind of illustrates our mission and vision with fun illustrations.
Anyway, I just wanted to say that for some reason today, like while I was meditating, I really felt like a very strong presence of us. And I was getting this message from him that he wanted me to tell you that he is super proud of you. And that
Lenny, I think something else is playing in the background.
Some other audio is coming through for some reason.
Oh yeah, can everybody please mute them?
Pride and of course like this all revolves around little Veer.
I think the host can mute everybody.
Let me see. Yeah, how can I?
That's sort of why he booked in.
Okay. Okay, I have muted everybody. Please unmute yourself, the speaker.
Eleni, we'll need you to unmute so we can hear the cool voiceover.
Yeah, Eleni, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, that's good.
Yes. Is the audio not coming through?
Okay.
We grow, distribute, and access food. Climate change has put everything at risk. It's impacting how we grow, distribute, and access food. Agriculture, specifically resilient farming, can help producers adapt to the stresses of climate change while combating both its causes and effects. At Regrow, we use science, technology, and software to make resilient farming possible on every acre around the globe. We work with people across the food supply chain, from the people producing our food to those who sell it. Our software, backed with leading science and technology, helps partners and customers measure their impact on the environment and identify the places where change will be most impactful. Then, we help model the changes that will be most sustainable, environmentally and financially. Finally, we track partners' progress against sustainability goals. All of this in service of a more sustainable food system. Sustainability leaders back progress towards their goals with trusted, verifiable information. That maximizes impact for brands looking to make a true difference. Ecosystem market sellers work with our scalable, transparent platform to bring sustainable practices to more producers and drive incentives for those practices. By identifying field-level trends and optimizing farm management decisions with our tools, producers can build crop and soil resilience on their farms. At Regrow, we believe science and technology can transform agriculture. We're proud of the producers, advisors, supply chain partners, and food companies that leverage our tools to create a healthier and cooler Earth, one field at a time.
So as the video highlighted, we want to enable farmers to continue their journey of land and product stewardship by making scientific and data-backed solutions that are accessible, scalable, and actionable for farmers. Will you go to the next? Thanks. So climate change is a global issue, so we find it only necessary to have an international team. The Regrow staff is located in more than 8 countries, and we represent over 10 different languages. So we currently monitor nearly 200 million acres of land annually in 45 countries. We're working to expand across the types of farming that will regenerate our soils and sequester greenhouse gases. We've already sequestered more than 77,000 metric tons of carbon from the atmosphere, and that's just in our pilot year of one project with one partner. And our reach is only expanding. We've partnered with Cargill, the Nature Conservancy, and General Mills to help food producers reduce emissions and allow companies to meet their net zero emissions goals. We've also kickstarted projects like Niche, a project funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This project optimizes crop placement in sub-Saharan Africa with partners like NASA Harvest. We're growing really quickly, and we don't plan to slow down anytime soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. Katie just really clearly laid out for us the issue that's in front of us in Regrow's mission and how we're gonna address those issues that are out there. And what I'd like to do is now just put a little bit of background in terms of like how we are actually going to do that. So we've laid out our mission. What are we actually doing? How does that operationalize? And I'm somebody who, as an enterprise account manager, I work with different actors within the supply chain to try to figure out how we make these solutions and this mission actionable for all of the players in this space. So if we could go to the next slide. So as Anastasia mentioned, I am active on our family farm as well. And so I definitely have my roots in kind of the first step of the supply chain, the growing of the thing, right? So that's what we do. And what I often have seen in my history in agriculture is how complicated it gets from there. And so this is a really simple just flow of one type of product one type of thing grown on a farm going to a buyer that buys that product from that farmer. Then that gets sold to a manufacturer that makes a product that then we buy on a shelf in a grocery store. And that looks really simple when we lay it out. It's just these nice, easy steps. But the reality is this is a super complex matrix of different products being grown in different places, using different methods, being purchased by different intermediary supply chain partners, different manufacturers producing different types of goods, and then all of the different endpoints in which we consume products. And so the fact that this supply chain is really complex makes it kind of hard to connect the decision makers and have actionable actions for each of these folks within this chain. And so that might sound like a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us because we have so many of these awesome folks who are already doing good work. Here we have a few of the partners that we work with, some pretty recognizable logos, especially if you've already been working in the agri-food space. And these are folks who are already doing awesome work in this space, that we partner with them and they understand the issues that Katie just laid out. And I think that that's what's such a huge and hopeful opportunity in this space is there are so many good folks along the supply chain that want to do good. They just need a way to connect with another partner within the supply chain and have a foundation of really strong science and data that they can use to communicate with one another. And that's really where we can come in and provide solutions. And that has been one of the major limiting factors. I can speak for myself personally on the farm. I know I do great work some days, and I know there are things that I could do even better, but I don't always have the data and the technology to be able to share that with the supply chain partners. And then conversely, I don't always know exactly what they're looking for me to do because we just don't speak the same data and technology language. And I think that that's what's really exciting about Regrow and the opportunity that we have here. The other thing that I will say about all of the different logos that exist in this space, and one of the things that I think is important to think about from a client perspective, is that everybody's at their own kind of journey within the supply chain. So some folks, they have been in the space a long time and they have really clear corporate goals. They're really specific. And then other folks are really brand new to this, and they maybe have been working in other areas of sustainability and are just starting to look further back into their supply chain and look to agriculture for a solution. And so part of our role is being able to come alongside them and provide the technology and data solutions that they need for their stage in their journey, which I think is also really important, because I think it again highlights the opportunity here. We have a lot of folks who are just getting started and a lot of folks who've been leading the way, so we can help bring folks along. And then if we could, yep, okay, just looking to make sure we're on the same. If we want to go back, sorry, Eleni, I'm skipping around on my slides. There we go. So like I said, the process that exists right now, I'm going to lay it out pretty simply, but there's a lot of complexity here, is that we have funds and markets that are paying farmers to do practices that lead to outcomes that then folks want to pay for. And so there's kind of this circle of interest and outcomes, and then the funds and kind of drivers behind that. And that circle kind of exists and is spinning in a few different areas. But a lot of times what's lacking is that really easy and robust monitoring verification piece. And that's one of the areas where Regrow is stepping in and providing those data and technology solutions for folks. So with that, I will kick it over, I believe, to Scott to talk a little bit about how that data and technology comes together.
Thanks, Elisa. Elisa just underscored and articulated very well the need for and importance of independent, scientifically rigorous, and highly available data, which naturally begs the question of how does Regrow get this data and how do we provide it to our customers? So happy to dive into that a bit more. So we get this through a combination of remote sensing, carbon modeling, and analytics. Put together, we're able to estimate carbon, soil stock, and greenhouse gas emissions. Through remote sensing, we're able to discern various management practices that growers are deploying on a farm. Coupling that information with public data sources for climate and soil, we have enough to then go and simulate a variety of outcomes. Put together and combined with our analytics tools, we can empower customers to make informed decisions and optimize for practices that are better for the soil and for the planet without sacrificing yields. So how do we accomplish all of this remotely? We're happy to tell you how. If you go to the next slide, Helen, thank you. So we were able to do this through what's called NDVI, which stands for the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. We take advantage of publicly available satellite data that provides us with the surface reflectance information, which can then be used to detect vegetation. This is done by measuring the normalized difference of infrared and visible light that is reflected from Earth back to the satellite. As is shown in the graphic, we can use that information to see the rate of vegetation, and the higher the NDVI, the higher the rate of vegetation. We use, as the slide says, Landsat and Sentinel-2 data. By keeping track of NDVI changes over time, we can feed that data into our machine learning algorithms to detect specific amounts of crop cover, which we're then able to extrapolate to specific management practices and the dates in which they occurred. We have similar algorithms in order to figure out and detect what specific crop and crop species were being grown. And as the image here shows, we're able to identify the specific dates of different events, including but not limited to crop planting, tillage dates, cover cropping practices, and more. Once we have that remote sensing data, we're able to use it for simulation. The model we primarily use is called DNDC, which stands for denitrification decomposition, and is the product of a collaboration with the University of New Hampshire. It's been extensively verified and reviewed by the scientific community, and model developments continue to occur based on the latest research. That research is performed both internally as well as externally. We have over 18 PhDs at Regrow, I believe, of our 65 plus employees, which if you do the quick math, that's something more than 25% of our employees have PhDs. And that definitely is going to position us well to continue leading in carbon modeling going forward. What's also interesting about the NDC is that we possess the only commercial license to use this model, which has been verified in over 33 countries. The inputs to the model are soil, weather, and management practice. Through these inputs, we're able to simulate carbon and nitrogen biochemistry on the farms. This enables us to predict crop growth, soil carbon dynamics, nitrogen leaching, emissions of greenhouse gases, and many other things that are going to be relevant for our growers. When we combine this with our remote sensing, we're able to create a snapshot of how croplands are managed and the effect various management practices have on soil health. And our remote first approach using our remote sensing enables us to scale to new geographies at a rate that is much faster than would be possible through traditional systems. This enables us to track where the most progress is being made and where we need to focus resources and funding in the future. This graphic on the slide is representing work that we did with the Nature Conservancy to study land use changes. And we are expanding this geography with them to the entire continental United States this year. Elisa, you're muted, and I forgot to hand it off to you anyway. But so with all of the data, once we have it, what do we do with it? And Elisa's going to tell us more about that.
Sorry about that. So yes, excellent, Scott. Thank you. So what do we do with this data? Scott just laid out a lot of the nitty gritty technical of what we do. And so I'm going to try to just quickly overview how this rolls up into three main platforms. And Katie will then, from a product perspective, dive into some of the details, but just to give you a sense of like the way in which we position these with different clients. And like I said, since everybody's at a different point in the supply chain and different journeys along their sustainability and climate mitigation journeys. This is kind of a suite of different things and different opportunities and ways that we utilize those fundamental technologies that Scott just covered to be able to provide solutions. So if we could go to the next slide. So the first of which is crop insights. As a farmer, this is particularly interesting and exciting to me because this is really providing those insights at the field level. So as a farmer, I can utilize this particular platform to be able to identify areas in which I can manage my crop better, whether that be improved nitrogen management or selecting a practice that makes the most sense for that acre in that field. And so this Crop Insights platform is really farmer focused and driven for making farm gate decisions. And so that's the first way that this information and all of this imagery and intelligence rolls up to the farmer. When we're talking with customers that are maybe a little bit earlier on in their sustainability journey, and maybe they're looking to expand their journey and take on a new region or a new territory, this Sustainability Insights tool is a way for us to aggregate that information and provide reports and kind of a little bit of a broader view of what the opportunities are as people are attempting to decide, where do I want to go in this space? What's the greatest opportunity? What are some of the factors that they might not have been thinking of? A lot of the companies that we work with think about regions in terms of sourcing regions and the ability to get the product they need from a particular region. But some of those underlying factors, such as the types of soils and the climate and the carbon sequestration potential, may not have been something that was on their radar maybe 10 years ago. And so as it's becoming more of interest, we can provide solutions that integrate that information about these different regions and different opportunities. And then lastly is our MRV suite. And this is where the rubber really meets the road in terms of being able to connect these two groups of people, the farmers that are doing the work on the ground, making daily decisions that impact carbon and greenhouse gas outcomes, and the organizations, the companies, the supply chain partners that want to be able to partner with those farmers. And the MRV suite is really the way in which farmers can come in and enter that information very intuitively. And it's also how we can go in and report and verify that the activities are in fact what the farmer said that they are, and then we can roll those up and report them in a way that facilitates the different types of standards and reporting requirements depending on our clients' needs. So with that, I will turn it over to Katie to talk a little bit more about the products.
Thanks, Lisa. And yeah, I'll talk about each one briefly independently, but Elisa did a great job. And I'll probably be just reiterating some of the things she already said. To start with Crop Insights, so producers project developers and food companies spanning different regions, different crop types, they can use this tool to implement resilient farming practices more efficiently. Producers, as Elisa was saying, can use the crop insights to track crop biomass over time, handle crop stress efficiently and quickly, and make precise nitrogen application decisions. Project developers and food brand advisors can use crop insights to help their growers deal with crop stress, identify new opportunities for practice changes, and co-develop those efficient nitrogen recommendations. And they can also monitor the effects of their efforts from one season to the next. With sustainability insights, thanks to the satellite imagery that Scott was talking about and data available through funding from the Nature Conservancy, Regrow is able to calculate data for every field for a number of years and understand the pattern of adoption of certain sustainable practices. An example of this might be cover crops. And this knowledge can be used in so many cool ways. For example, if a company wants to launch a program in carbon markets, this tool can help them answer questions like, where do they have the best shot for growers to adopt these practices? Or where are there farmers that would be eligible to enter carbon markets based on verification standards? Companies can also use the abatement potential feature to understand not only current emissions, but potential emissions based on practice changes. But really, this is just the tip of the iceberg with sustainability insights. And then MRV, so backing up to ecosystem markets for a second, ecosystem markets today are fast growing and they can be tricky. Adopting climate smart practices requires time and money for farmers, and receiving appropriate payment for these efforts is complicated. There are some barriers currently, like markets relying on manual data entry, extensive in-field collection, and soil sampling to quantify credits and payment for farmers. These currently used labor-heavy processes are unscalable for global agriculture. But Regrow's remote sensing capabilities, the biogeochemical modeling, soil analytics, can help overcome those barriers in scalability and lower uncertainty. This translates to more credits being issued to farmers and a larger collective impact. Right now, some companies are also both measuring farmers' efforts and setting the price for credits, which is a conflict of interest. And this lack of transparency can jeopardize the integrity in the marketplace, but Regrow can provide an independent MRV to address this conflict of interest. Regrow is actually currently working with Cargill. We touched on that a bit before. We're helping develop and deploy the Cargill Regen Connect program, which connects farmers to growing carbon marketplaces. This is part of Cargill's mission to convert 10 million acres of North American land to regenerative agriculture. And so we're entering the monitoring phase of the program in the coming weeks, and we're seeing the impact of this year's Cargill Regen Connect farmers already surpassing our expectations. And finally, the beauty of the three products I just laid out is how they work together. They don't work in isolation. For example, a client can use our sustainability insights tool to identify the growers and sourcing areas where they should allocate resources to start a program to incentivize growers to adopt sustainable practices. And that program will use our MRV to monitor the practices. So now we're going to take a little time. We talked about Regrow and our products and our science, and we wanted to talk a little bit about us, I guess, and what it's like for us to work at Regrow. So Scott, can you kick us off with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sitting through our presentation. We definitely wanted to dedicate some time towards like how we got here, because I understand that's the mission of this this Slack group, which I think is awesome. You guys want to work in this space, and we have gotten here. So we figured it's only fair to talk about that and try to inspire as many people as possible to take the same move. So my background is in computer science and economics. I worked in finance for 5+ years. I did find the work to be intellectually stimulating, which is probably part of the reason I stayed as long as I did, despite having other interests. But at the end of the day, I never really felt fulfilled. So I was looking for climate opportunities for a while. When I was trying to find something that actually spoke to me, I kept running into software engineer positions in transportation and electricity. both of which I think are interesting, but the actual roles themselves I found to be, I wasn't sure if I was really going to enjoy them. It's kind of integration with antiquated systems, supporting infrastructure, sometimes building websites for companies that really aren't technological at all. So I didn't really find a good fit until I found Regrow. I also think that those spaces, this is a personal opinion, like have clear pathways towards decarbonization, where I think that there are other industries that need the people and the resources working on these problems, trying to solve them, because they have a much less clear path without the efforts that we put forth. So I think ag was a perfect fit. I think that specifically what I love about Regrow is the startup culture. There's opportunities available both individually and for the company if we work hard, and we're doing that. So a typical day in the life for me is we're a pretty global company, as is mentioned on a couple of the slides. And at this point, I work pretty much daily with people in Australia, the Ukraine, India, and Brazil. If you notice, I did that in order of time zone because that's something I'm becoming more aware of, having to reflect on the people I work with. So when I wake up every morning, I kind of review work that was done prior to my working day, and organize and do code review. I'm more of a lead role now, so I'm doing a lot of planning with people. We are constantly working with the business side and the scientists to understand that we have features to model what they need to correctly. And we're also working a lot internally on the engineering side with scalability. My day ends usually with syncing with the Australian half of the company, and then we repeat it all the next day. Elisa, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I have a very, very different background than Scott, and I've learned so much from him, and honestly, just from coming to Regrow. Having grown up in agriculture, actively farming, have worked a lot. My educational background is in soil science, and I had been working on a on-farm soil health research project for over 6 years, trying to collect data, measure differences in soils, and it's just a very cumbersome thing to do, to try to wrangle all this information in addition to all of the other things that are happening on farm. And then also throw in the complexity of measuring soil is like one of the most difficult things to measure. And so all of that complexity kind of, it was good to get that experience with that research project, but it also kind of left me at times just going like, how the heck are we ever going to get all of this like together in a way that people can actually interact with it? So it's easy, it's intuitive. Farmers already have a lot of systems in place that have become intuitive and easy, and interacting with and understanding their soil is one area where it's just never been very easy or intuitive to understand what's happening. And that's really what inspired me and made me want to come to Regrow. I had worked with some of the scientists that work on the modeling side of things, and I was just always really impressed and inspired by them, and always wanted there to be some way for their information to get into the hands of farmers and to the companies that I've worked with that want to do good work and help farmers. And this was the opportunity to make that happen. And it's just been amazing to be able to see the ways in which I honestly, my day in the life is just, I poke at problems and like identify things that I'm like, wait, a farmer wouldn't use it like this. This is not how this company is going to want this information. And then Scott and Katie just magically fix it. That's really like, from my perspective, my day in the life is like the least technical, I feel like. But I have that background in understanding how these decisions get made actually in the agricultural landscape. And it's just so exciting to see the science and technology come through to be able to actually enable this to take place. So my day in the life is very similar to Scott's in the time frame that we're talking about with a global company. I'm checking in with folks in different time zones all the time, depending on the stage of a project. And then that actually works out really well for me with my other activities that I do on farm, because as someone who grew up in agriculture, we're known for being a little bit of workaholics. And so I can go work on a couple of things for the farm and then come back online when the next kind of batch of folks comes back online for their workday, and kind of continually work throughout the day. And it's been immensely satisfying for me. And my primary account that I work with is the Cargill account. Like Katie said, we're entering the monitoring phase next, and there is a ton of activity. I just got to chat with some of those folks. Great work happening, and I'm super excited about it. So I'll be quiet now so Katie can talk.
I also have a very different background than my colleagues here. My background is in climate change education as well as web design. I spent 10 years teaching people about the environmental issues affecting their communities, but I got into product design because I truly believe in the power of technology in order to address the climate crisis. And the type of technology that Regrow is creating. I take tremendous daily pride in working to find ways to make sure that our users can navigate through our products, because I think it's just one key step in scaling up these platforms, getting more people involved, getting more acres under sustainable practices. My daily life is working with our brilliant product owner to design workflows for the platforms. I communicate between the data science teams, product teams about, everyone needs to, the coolest thing about our company is how like everyone comes together. All the teams need to communicate together about maybe like, for example, requirements for the models, how these work with the needs of the users. And I communicate daily with developers on the user experience, QA, testing data. I also get to work actually with the marketing team with Eleni, which is wonderful, and to make sure our brand is consistent throughout everything the public sees. Like together, Eleni and I worked together on the script for the video that you watched earlier. So, if you worked for a startup, you know that you kind of work on a lot of different things. That's what I actually really love about startups. And Scott and Elisa stole this. I was going to say the coolest thing about my job is the connection I have to our international teammates, but I'm not surprised that they also think that that's really cool. So, in the morning, I'll communicate with developers in Ukraine, and then throughout the day, I'm working with the US team. In the evening, I work with my Australian teammates, and I love that. I think it's just the coolest thing, the most unique thing about my job. And I wouldn't trade that for anything, even if that means I sometimes have a meeting at 9:00 at night. I don't care. So yeah, that's my spiel. Yeah, so we just wanted to kind of end it with this, as I had said earlier, we're expanding and we're not going to be stopping anytime soon. So the future of Regrow, that's going to look like adding regions, adding crop types, adding new practices to our suite of tools, and continuing to grow as a team. So maybe that means you. And our wonderful CEO, Anastasia, said we'll have much less CO2 going into the atmosphere, a lot more carbon feeding the processes in the soil, have a lot more farmers being compensated for the good work they're doing, and we'll have a lot more food companies enact the change they want to see in the world, taking their goals from words to action. So that's where we're headed.
I guess we should also take some questions that are popping in the chat.
Yeah,
I can only say I'm proud of all of them. I'm proud of my folks that can just do what they're doing without, I think the success of the CEO of the company is when you're redundant. Such a good feeling. And of course, I still have a little bit of a job, but the best part is that all of this happened without me. Great. I would love for us to take some of the juicier questions, like uncertainty of our carbon models and so on and so forth. Eugene, do you think we still have the time, or?
Yeah, absolutely. We have until the end of the hour. So yeah, I think there's indeed a bunch of questions that basically have to do with how do you guys measure carbon and how are you sure that it's good? And I think Matt Wilson Plastic's question is probably most representative. Matt, do you want to unmute yourself and ask?
Sure, yeah. I also saw there's a bunch of similar questions, and I come at this from caring a lot about soil carbon, coming from a farming family myself in the Midwest. And my question basically is, I know soil carbon is really important to Regrow and also to all of us around climate change. And I'm kind of the first person to want more carbon in the soil and more organic matter. But I think in terms of credits or offsets, I'm definitely concerned around the quality of these, given that, I've been a part of a lot of conversations where the quality of remote sensing and sometimes even in situ sensing with the soil carbon can be highly variable, not very accurate, and so to base offsets around that is tricky to make sure they're actually doing what we expect them to do. So I guess I'm curious, like how do you deal with that? Like how do you create credits from these measurements when there's kind of a high degree of error, and how do you make sure that actually helps climate at the end of the day?
I can go ahead and take a first shot at that, and I'm sure some of my teammates would like to contribute as well. But I think one of the things that is important to note, just a step before that, is that as a lot of organizations are figuring out what they want to do in this space, everybody has different expectations. What you feel like might be a lesser quality credit might be the highest quality credit that somebody else feels like they could achieve in their supply chain. And so what I think is really, really valuable about the technology and the way in which our technology operates is that we can configure things to be able to address the needs of that client relationship and the standards or the types of credits and uncertainty that they would like to report around. So there are the model outcomes, and then there's also uncertainty modeling that's done around that for the particular scope of that exact project, so that we can provide, it's not just like this credit is the same as that credit is the same as that credit. It's this project is operating within this framework and understanding, which again is really important as we are a global company, because different countries have very different standards and expectations around this. So we can set up the program and the associated data to be able to fit the specifications of that standard and uncertainty expectation. And then we also, like I said, we report that separately. There are the outcomes, and then there's also the uncertainty model that is run on those outcomes. So, and that's again done at the project level. So it's every single project has that done for each individual project. So that's a little bit of how that's done. And I think that they're really valuable questions, because as someone, like, sounds like we're both in the Midwest and farm country, we want to make sure that what we do is accurate and is we're not speaking out of turn in terms of the reputation of agriculture. Is very important for myself personally. It sounds like you as well. So.
Would you be able to share, like, what is the accuracy and the typical range of uncertainty for your models?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. It's a bit of a meta question, because you don't just have, so you have one carbon model that has over 500 publications with the modules for each crop. And then what Regrow does is that we, on one hand, our science team collects all of the available literature and available data against which we can run the accuracy and uncertainty estimation. And then there's a beautiful piece of infrastructure called Calvin, calibration validation infrastructure, that like throws the model at this data, and the scientists are like tuning parameters. So for the Midwest, for example, for the wider corn and even wheat belt, you'd be looking at the 90% in terms of like the usual rotation. This will be the whole scope of that land mass. As Scott mentioned, we're expanding to all of the US. And we've seen that generally high 80s, 90s is where DNDC performs. We work with a lot of research institutions like Agri-Canada and others that do perform their own independent studies. There's a center in Europe, center in Asia. So everyone's looking to improve the model. I think the range we're pretty comfortable with, and the standards, most importantly, are comfortable with. And there's actually not a hard and fast rule as to what quality, what accuracy and uncertainty do you need to get to in order to be approved by the standard. It actually is most important to reflect the real world logic that if farmers are making a change in practices, we call that intervention, we have a logically proportional or connected outcome estimation, because it's all about how can you influence the system. So it's not about the perfect accounting, because then we would just have physical measurement infrastructure, IoT rolled out everywhere, and it's very expensive. What is important here is to incentivize movement in the right direction. And of course, for the scale and the price, you can't find a better solution. So that's how we think about it.
Makes sense. Yeah, thank you. Archie, looks like some of the questions you had probably could expand on this a little bit. Do you want to unmute and ask?
Sure. Hi, I'm Archie. I work on industrial carbon accounting in London. So we measure like aluminium and steel and cement and that kind of thing. So very similar in many ways, a bit simpler in some cases because there's fewer aluminium smelters than there are fields. But I was wondering how you think about the role of animals on these fields. Are you able to measure what their contribution is? And then how do you deal with the kind of double-edged sword of the direct methane emissions, but then also the important role in regenerative agriculture?
We currently don't have our animal guys and girls on the call, so I'll try to take it for them. We actually do have specialists in carbon who specifically work on livestock, and their degrees and theses are focused on that. So in all scientific honesty, the dice is still in the air on like how useful can regenerative grazing be to agriculture and to emission reduction. And we believe in some areas extremely useful, in some other areas, arid country, it can be harder. So we are in the process of kind of overhauling and investing more into that. We've done some early testing with universities of Montana and Arizona, I believe, where we've shown against ground truth that we can track regenerative grazing from satellite imagery and discern it from normal fluctuations that follow seasons. And then we've got access to models that help us estimate the emissions associated with that. Archie, part of your question, I understand, also has to do with enteric emissions, and this also touches for us on dairy. So we do work around dairy and have specific models that estimate that for a dairy of this size, if you have this much, I would say cattle, but like this much livestock in it, if you change the feed mix to be such and such, you should expect such and such outcomes in terms of reduction of methane. So it's not like, you know, the scientific communication and videos these days that actually prove that that's a different kind of methane emission from the one that humans have caused. Like the one that animal causes actually breaks up in the atmosphere a lot faster and causes a lot less problems. And so it's interesting that like we seem to just bulk it up together and say, well, cows are the problem. Well, they're not. And the world has been living with cows for as long as we remember it, and we shouldn't just say, well, let's blame the animal. I think we can definitely manage that situation, that whole agricultural area better, and our leading customers are very interested in improving those enteric emissions in dairy. So the jury is a bit out on the regenerative grazing, a little bit clearer on the dairy side of the house. There is asparagopsis additives, basically like seaweed-based additives that have been invented in different places kind of simultaneously in Australia that reduce emissions very significantly. So that's what we're seeing, modeling, that's our involvement there.
Just to add to that briefly, as I mentioned in the presentation, DNDC is a carbon and nitrogen biochemistry model. So it's an event-based model, and we do have a grazing event. So that grazing event has properties like the type of animal, the amount of animals in the herd, how often they're being rotated. And just to get into the details there, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on it. I'm not one of the 25% of the employees who have a PhD, but it can be boiled down into those simple terms. And that's how the model thinks about it.
Since you mentioned nitrogen, and maybe I can take a bit of a liberty here, Eugene, do you have a way of measuring fertilizer use remotely?
Not remotely. So the way that we measure it, so we've built, I would give you two answers. So remotely, we can track status within a particular growth stage. So we've developed science over the years by capturing a lot of data for high input crops, i.e. those that consume a lot of fertilizer. The mapping to some of the additional indices, like Scott only mentioned in DVI, it's kind of an oversimplification just to get the message across, but there is more information from satellites. And there's an index that is very well correlated with the levels of nitrogen in the canopy at a particular growth stage that is considered to be early development of the plant. So we've done those studies and we know there's a very high correlation. And I often say that we can see crops glow when they are overfed in nitrogen. So you can't see it with the naked eye, but the satellite can see it because it's kind of near infrared spectrum. So we can tell that. Archie, I want to be clear that like we can't necessarily say to a fraction of how exactly it would be when if we tissue test or petiole test, like that nitrogen flux is actually a diurnal flux and it's quite hard to catch, but we know the bracket in which we have the accuracy. What we usually do with it is understand where across the field there's more or less, there's more needed or less needed, more available. So we kind of try to understand how to help the farmer make a decision on in-field application. For the sake of modeling that Scott was talking about, we also use standard numbers, such as the farmer reports they have this much yield. We know that roughly in, say, Iowa, it takes this many pounds of nitrogen to get to that yield. And because we model the 2-3 year cycle of nitrogen, we see what they planted before, what crop it was, and then we know if it's additive or is it removing nitrogen. So if they've planted some beans, those of course are nitrogen fixing. So we model that entire cycle, and that's how we try to get at it, from modeling and standard assumptions, plus a little bit of remote sensing as much as we can add to it.
Yeah, thank you, Anastasia. I want to take another question. So there's a couple of questions related to the basically data sources and machine learning methods that you guys are using. Yeah, Jocelyn, do you want to unmute and ask yours?
I'm trying to think. I asked a few questions. On the data source one, I think it was just about how passively / actively are you getting your data. And so my understanding is that there is passive, kind of this is public information that is satellite data that you do use. And from there, you infer management practices. And then I'm sure there's similar passively receive data on climate and soil quality, soil type, soil structure. How much are you asking for your clients, your partners, the growers to actively provide data to feed the models and the estimations that you run?
Jocelyn, just to make sure I understood, so your question is if the data collection that we have to use for our model training is passive. Is this the question?
Is it passive, or are you actively gathering data that requires your partners to provide that? On a project basis, more at the ground level.
Yeah, so we've originally the business that I started before we were branded to Regrow was the business that specifically focused on agronomic decision support. So working with farmers and their advisors to help fix the overuse of nitrogen on the farm, the overuse of pesticide on the farm, by having precise recommendations on what can be done where without being afraid to jeopardize the yield. And that part of the business is still running. We call it agronomic solutions or crop insights. It's similar data set, passively collected satellite imagery, access to public data sets, passively collected weather information. So we're the benefactors of people investing millions of dollars, billions of dollars into satellites that collect this data, into programs that collect this data. We take all of it, but we also have the part of the business where the farmer, by adding the additional information that is true about their farm, by connecting their farm equipment, can get benefit in practical advice for their crop management in season. And so this creates an additional virtuous cycle where if they add more data, they get more accurate estimates and their uncertainty shrinks and their carbon credits are more certain and more valuable. For example, to just take one of the kind of value creation cycles we have in our products. So summarize, not only we have passive bulk data collection of like 90% of the data we collect, we also have virtuous cycle built for data collection from the farm to bring what I often call monetization of farm data back to farm gate. So the opportunity to really derive value. Eugene, can I take the last question? I really like it, from Will. I'll be quick.
Sure, yeah, seems like a good next question, quite different from those asked before. Go for it.
Yeah, so the question from Will is that, sorry, I wanted the question from Sean actually. So the question was, a lot of us from work and climate community are looking, have plenty of work experience, director level above. And one of the biggest challenges is that there are few senior roles, and many of them require specific expertise in carbon markets or ag industry that people don't have. Would you offer some advice for experienced candidates but new to the space and job hunting? How can we are going to be relevant in that? So in, for example, product management, as mentioned in that post, we actually don't assume that you have background in anything that we're doing. This is why we have Elisa and her partners in crime on board. Like, there's people who actually know so much more about it, and we've developed plenty of resources internally that bring your awareness up to speed. When Scott was joining, I don't think he knew what carbon modeling and event-based biogeochemical modeling specifically is or was, but he's still a great engineering lead, and it's important to just understand what you're kind of handling and be genuinely curious about it. At this stage of the company, and this is my general advice, so if you're looking for an into the climate space and you're at senior director level, we actually are actively hiring for that level of roles, because we've reached at this kind of Series A, B stage in our development, the point where we just feel like an enterprise software company with subject matter experts on board. So far from everybody who joins the company needs to have the carbon and agriculture knowledge. It's really important to pair our experts in soil carbon, agriculture, and farming with the domain experts in product, enterprise sales, enterprise customer success, and we're actively looking for those. So my advice in summary would be to look at companies that are a little later stage like us, so not early stage customers, not early stage companies, because you can't afford to have just people who have complementary expertise, because you can't hire that many people. At our stage, we can, and we know we'll monetize all of that expertise and build up that body of knowledge internally. So that would be my take on how you can make your way into it. And as an employer, I'm telling you what I'm looking for. So I'm sure other people might have different opinions, but this is definitely a way.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you so much, Anastasia. So we're coming to the end of the hour, and people asked more questions. I'm going to perhaps hand them over to you guys if in case you want to answer them on Slack, or maybe add answer to meeting notes after the fact. But I also want to remind people that we have a time-honored tradition of people sharing one thing they learned from the event. And please go onto the event's official thread and just comment straight up on my thread about the event right there. This is a really good way to, one, I guess, show to the speaker that you remembered something, and two, to actually remember something. It's clear that if you write something down, you will remember it much better. Yeah, thank you everyone for attending, and a huge thank you for the speakers. Fascinating talk. Yeah, I guess that's it for today. Thank you everyone. See you next time.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.